In this episode, we take the next step after identifying risk events and begin looking closely at what those events can actually do to an organization when they become real. This is where risk management starts to feel especially practical, because it is one thing to say that an event might happen and another thing to understand the losses, disruption, and business consequences that could follow from it. The Certified in Risk and Information Systems Control (CRISC) perspective expects you to move beyond vague concern and toward disciplined analysis that explains why leadership should care about a given event. When you can describe loss results and business impacts clearly, you help decision-makers understand not only that exposure exists, but also what that exposure could cost in money, time, trust, compliance pressure, and operational stability. That ability matters because organizations do not manage risk well by reacting only to technical symptoms. They manage risk better when they can connect a risk event to the real-world harm it could create for the business and the people who depend on it. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is to separate the idea of a loss result from the idea of a business impact, because these two concepts are closely related but not exactly the same. A loss result is the specific harm or damage that follows from a risk event, such as lost revenue, recovery cost, corrupted data, legal expense, or productivity decline. A business impact is the broader effect that loss has on the organization's ability to operate, serve customers, meet obligations, protect its reputation, and pursue strategic objectives. In simple terms, the loss result is what gets hurt, while the business impact explains why that hurt matters to the enterprise as a whole. For example, if a critical application fails during a sales period, the direct loss result may include missed transactions and overtime recovery costs, but the business impact may include customer frustration, delayed financial reporting, strained support teams, and weakened confidence in the organization's reliability. This distinction helps C-risk learners think more clearly, because risk analysis becomes much stronger when it goes beyond naming damage and starts explaining what that damage means in the wider business environment. This kind of analysis matters because organizations often misjudge risk when they focus too narrowly on the event itself and not enough on the downstream effects. A malware infection, identity compromise, vendor outage, or data error may sound serious on its own, but leadership still needs a reasoned explanation of what those events would do to revenue, operations, legal commitments, customer trust, or strategic goals. Without that analysis, risk discussions can become emotional, political, or inconsistent because people fill the gaps with assumptions rather than evidence. One team may treat an event as catastrophic, while another treats it as a routine inconvenience, and neither side may be grounding its view in the actual business consequences. Analyzing loss results and impacts creates a more stable basis for comparison across different risks, because it translates technical and operational concerns into a language that business leaders can understand and act on. In that sense, the work is not only about estimating harm. It is also about improving the quality of decision-making by giving leadership a more realistic picture of what is at stake. One of the first lessons in this area is that loss can take many forms, and some of the most important ones are not immediately visible when the event first occurs. Direct financial loss is often the easiest to imagine because it includes things like stolen funds, fraud losses, ransom payments, system repair costs, incident response expenses, contractual penalties, and lost sales during downtime. Those are real and important, but they are only part of the story. Loss can also appear as operational inefficiency, missed deadlines, customer attrition, degraded service quality, regulatory scrutiny, legal defense costs, increased insurance expense, or reduced confidence from business partners. In some environments, there may even be safety consequences if technology failure affects industrial systems, healthcare processes, or emergency communication. A new learner should understand that the visible cost of an incident is often only the surface layer. Mature risk analysis looks beneath that surface and asks what other forms of harm may emerge over time as departments absorb the disruption and as external stakeholders respond to what happened. It is also important to understand the difference between direct losses and indirect losses, because organizations sometimes focus heavily on what is easiest to count and underestimate everything that follows after the first wave of damage. Direct losses are closely tied to the event itself, such as the cost to restore systems, investigate the incident, replace damaged equipment, or process refunds after a service failure. Indirect losses are the secondary effects that spread through the organization after the original problem has already begun, such as a decline in customer retention, higher employee burnout, delayed projects, weakened market confidence, or added management attention that pulls leaders away from strategic priorities. Indirect losses may not show up on the first day, but they can become more expensive than the initial disruption. A breach that requires months of customer communications, remediation efforts, partner reassurance, and regulatory engagement can create a long tail of cost that far exceeds the initial containment effort. C-risk thinking requires this broader view, because the organization needs to understand not only what the event costs right away, but also what the aftermath may cost over weeks, months, or even years. Time is another major factor in impact analysis, because the same risk event can produce very different consequences depending on when it occurs, how long it lasts, and how quickly the organization can respond. A short outage in a low-demand period may be inconvenient but manageable, while the same outage during a peak season, financial close period, or critical operational window may become far more damaging. Likewise, an event that is detected quickly and contained early may result in limited loss, while a similar event that goes unnoticed for days or weeks may spread through systems, affect more data, and create far greater disruption. This is why analysts often pay close attention to duration, timing, recovery complexity, and the presence or absence of workarounds. A payroll issue discovered before processing begins has a different impact from one discovered after pay is delayed for thousands of employees. Time shapes loss, and good analysis reflects that reality. It asks not only what could happen, but when, for how long, and under what circumstances that event would create the greatest strain on the business. Another important idea is that some impacts can be measured fairly precisely, while others are more qualitative, meaning they are still real but harder to express in exact numbers. Financial loss, overtime expense, lost transactions, or system restoration cost may be estimated with reasonable confidence, especially if the organization has historical data or known pricing models. Reputation damage, employee morale problems, diminished customer confidence, or weakened negotiating position with partners may be much harder to reduce to a simple figure, but that does not make them less important. In fact, these less tangible impacts can shape the long-term health of the organization in powerful ways. A public incident may not cause immediate collapse in revenue, but it may slowly erode trust, increase customer hesitation, and force the company to spend heavily on reassurance and recovery. Risk professionals, therefore, need to be comfortable discussing both measurable and judgment-based impacts. C-risk does not require magical precision. It requires disciplined reasoning, where both numeric and non-numeric consequences are considered honestly and explained in terms leaders can use. Business process context is what turns general impact analysis into useful impact analysis, because losses always matter in relation to the work the organization is trying to perform. A database failure means one thing in a test environment and something very different in a payment system, patient records platform, or manufacturing workflow. The same kind of technical event can have dramatically different consequences depending on what business process it supports, how often that process runs, how many people depend on it, and whether alternatives exist when the normal system is unavailable. This is why strong analysts spend time understanding dependencies. They ask which services are customer-facing, which processes are essential to revenue or compliance, which internal operations can tolerate delay, and which ones become dangerous or damaging if interrupted even briefly. Once those dependencies are visible, the likely loss results become clearer as well. A failure in an isolated support application may create modest inconvenience, but a failure in identity services, transaction processing, or dispatch systems can cascade outward and affect multiple teams, customers, and partners in ways that are much more serious. That cascade effect is a major theme in this topic, because many risk events do not stay neatly contained within the system where they began. A single technology problem may interrupt connected applications, delay approvals, block employee access, create reporting gaps, or cause a chain reaction across vendors and customers. A compromised administrator account may begin as an identity issue but quickly become a data protection problem, an operational disruption problem, and a legal notification problem depending on what the attacker can reach. A failed software change may start in one platform and then ripple through interfaces, customer communication channels, billing systems, and support operations. Analyzing business impact, therefore, means following the path of consequences beyond the initial technical boundary. This is where immature risk analysis often falls short, because it describes the local problem without tracing the wider disruption it could create. Mature analysis asks who else depends on this process, what downstream activities would fail, what obligations would be missed, and how the organization's normal rhythm of work would change if the event became serious. It is also helpful to remember that different stakeholders experience impact in different ways, which means no single perspective tells the whole story. Executives may focus on strategic disruption, revenue exposure, and reputational damage. Operations leaders may focus on missed service levels, process backlog, staffing strain, and recovery effort. Legal and compliance teams may focus on notification duties, reporting deadlines, evidence preservation, and potential sanctions. Customers will care about whether services remain available, whether their data is protected, and whether the organization communicates honestly when something goes wrong. Employees may experience the impact through confusion, manual workarounds, longer hours, or reduced confidence in the systems they rely on to do their jobs. Good analysis recognizes these different lenses and brings them together rather than assuming one department's view is enough. This does not mean every risk event requires endless stakeholder interviews, but it does mean the analyst should think broadly enough to understand that loss is rarely confined to one team. Business impact becomes clearer when you appreciate how many parts of the organization and its environment may feel the consequences. Examples can make this more concrete. Imagine a ransomware event affecting a logistics company. The immediate loss results might include encrypted systems, incident response expenses, delayed shipments, and emergency technical recovery costs. The business impacts could expand into missed contractual obligations, strained customer relationships, overtime for operations teams, reputational harm in the marketplace, and reduced confidence from partners who depend on timely delivery. Now imagine a quieter event, such as a data quality failure in a financial reporting process. There may be no dramatic outage at all, yet the loss results could include inaccurate reports, rework, delayed filings, audit concerns, and management distraction, while the business impact could include regulatory scrutiny and damaged internal confidence in decision-making data. These examples show why risk analysis should not be limited to noisy security incidents. Some impacts arrive through disruption, others through error, delay, or weak integrity, but all of them matter if they interfere with the organization's objectives or create meaningful cost and exposure. There are several common mistakes that beginners make when analyzing loss results and business impacts, and recognizing them early can improve both exam performance and real-world judgment. One mistake is assuming that the cost of an event is limited to the immediate technical recovery effort, which often leads to serious underestimation. Another is using generic statements about impact without tying them to a real business process, real stakeholders, or real obligations. Some learners also focus so heavily on what is easiest to measure that they ignore hard-to-quantify effects such as trust erosion, employee burden, or executive distraction. Others assume that if an organization has backups or insurance, the impact must be low, which is not necessarily true because recovery may still be slow, incomplete, or reputationally damaging. A further mistake is failing to account for timing, scale, and interdependence. A moderate event in one setting can become severe in another if it occurs during a critical period, affects a high-value service, or spreads across multiple business functions. Strong analysis resists these shortcuts and keeps asking what the real downstream consequences would be. Evidence is essential in this work because sound impact analysis should be informed by more than intuition. Analysts may use prior incident records, system recovery experience, outage reports, process maps, service-level commitments, financial data, vendor information, audit findings, and conversations with business owners to estimate likely consequences. A team that understands how long a process can be down, what manual workarounds exist, how quickly customers notice failure, and what obligations would be triggered by data loss will produce a much stronger assessment than a team relying only on guesswork. This is also why collaboration matters. Technical staff may know how a system fails, but business owners know what that failure would interrupt, and legal or compliance teams know what external consequences may follow. Bringing those perspectives together helps create analysis that is grounded rather than speculative. C-risk thinking encourages exactly this kind of disciplined synthesis, where evidence from multiple sources is used to develop a realistic picture of loss rather than a simplistic number or an unsupported opinion offered in isolation. All of this analysis becomes valuable because it supports better prioritization, reporting, and response later in the risk process. Leaders need to know which events could create the greatest harm, which losses would be hardest to recover from, and which impacts would cross important thresholds for the business. If one event is likely to cause a short inconvenience while another could disrupt revenue, trigger legal obligations, and weaken customer trust for months, the organization should not treat them as equals. Analyzing loss results helps distinguish those differences. It also improves communication because risk reports become more persuasive when they explain likely business consequences rather than only listing technical findings. When a risk owner understands what could actually be lost, the decision about whether to accept, mitigate, transfer, or avoid the risk becomes much more grounded in business reality. In that sense, impact analysis is not a side exercise performed after the interesting work is done. It is one of the central activities that turns raw risk information into actionable judgment. By the end of this discussion, the key lesson should be that analyzing loss results and business impacts means looking beyond the initial event and tracing what real harm could follow for the organization, its people, and its obligations. Direct and indirect losses, immediate and delayed consequences, measurable and qualitative effects, and local and cascading disruptions all play a role in understanding how serious a risk event may become. Strong analysis depends on business context, evidence, and clear thinking about who is affected, what processes are interrupted, and why the consequences matter to leadership. This is one of the most important habits you can build in Domain 2, because later risk decisions depend heavily on how well these impacts were understood in the first place. When you can explain not only what might happen, but also what that event could truly cost in operational, financial, legal, and reputational terms, you are doing exactly the kind of disciplined risk work that C-Risk is designed to develop.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.